So, I have 5 pages on Loki. There you go. Loki the character. I love Loki. Loki is wonderful. But the way he's been written in the films is a little bit... he's not the star. Thor is the star. So they try to do his story, but there are inconsistencies, and this is what this thing is going to be about inconsistencies, and things that are in there and that nobody apparently saw. This was I'm trying to stick to stuff that is only in the actual canon, mostly the film canon. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the actual Loki and some of about that much about the comics. It's not that important. But it's basically this Loki we're talking about, the one from the movies. The first introduction of Loki is in the movies, in Thor #1. Loki and Thor are introduced at the same time as kids under King Odin, their father, who tells them that the frost giants are the ogres of this universe and should probably that it's the enemy. And little Thor says, I'm gonna kill all the frost giants when I grow up, and little Loki goes yay, because there's Thor and there's Loki, and so Thor will Odin keeps telling them that they will both be kings, which is I don't know why he's saying that, because that's impossible. You have an heir and you have a spare, and Loki is the spare. And there is no kingship for the spare. There is king for the heir, and if something happens to the heir, then the spare becomes the heir. But until that time, and this is a problem that kings throughout history have, kings and heirs have throughout history have dealt with. That only one person can be king. They live in a feudal realm with a feudal system. The king, there's just a king. He doesn't even have a council. He may listen to his wife, to Frigga, but he doesn't have to do anything. There's no law. There's no talk of law. Nobody says anything about law. They're basically they don't say but mean that the word of the king is the law. If the king says this will happen, then it will happen. If the king says it won't happen, then it won't happen. And that is something that the director Kenneth Branagh very much realized, and that's how he plays it. Him and the director after that both got it. But what to do with Loki? In the original Eddas, the relationships are all messed up. But they are all from original storytelling that has actually been written down in the 13th century by a chappie called Snoddy, which is in Dutch makes a pun. It means middle moustache. So Mr. Moustache wrote the whole thing down from lore, and that is the lore that they used, that the Marvel Comics used in 1962 to make the very first Thor and Loki stories, because where there's Thor, there's Loki, because you need a bad guy. Here they are brothers. I think they're in the 1962 version. They're also brothers. So this is the lore here. The brothers, heir and a spare, and the frost giants are the bad guys. And then you get 1,000 years of nothing at all, and we go to now, which is very weird. It doesn't work. I may do a video about the film itself, because it has a whole bunch of issues which are not the film's fault, but are from outside sources. The outside influences need this story to be set in the now time. But basically they didn't do anything for 1,000 years, and after 1,000 years Thor is about a 17-year-old and Loki is about a 15-year-old. They act like that. If you look at it and you say, okay, he's 17 and he's 15, yeah, they're physically a little bit too mature for that, but that's how they act. The way that Thor is jealous and the way that Loki hangs around him and the friends. Loki is not the friends of these friends of Thor. He's just a hanger-on. He's the little brother from, 8 or a little older. That little brother that always hangs around. And after 1,000 years, I don't believe it. That's the bad writing in this, is that 1,000 years cannot be incorporated. They just can't do it. And so they sort of ignore it because they have no choice. To the point that when there's a reference in the Loki series about this same Loki, is that they actually make a mistake and they say that something that happened to Loki in the 1950s was a very long time ago. Forget that he's 1,000 years old because he's been presented wrong in this movie. There's a lot of, and this 1,000 years is going to bite them in the butt again soon. This 1,000 years bites them in the butt twice. Plot happens and they end up on Jotunheim. Because frost giants, and I'm not going to go into what happened and why. There's machinations, and Loki may or may not have been into the machinations. It doesn't really matter. And he is touched by one of the frost giants, and whereas everybody else who's touched has injuries from frostbite, he just turns blue. And because he didn't develop for 1,000 years, but he's not stupid, so he realized pretty quickly something's going on. And he touches the only relic they have of frostbiteness in at home, and again he turns blue. And then he asks Odin, "Am I cursed? What is going on here?" And then Odin tells him, "Oh well, you are actually a frost giant, a baby that I picked up at the end of the last war." And this is all kinds of bad, and I just have a whole page on this. Just on this. Because this conversation is very weird, because Odin starts to say something and then he stops. And you think it's because he becomes unwell. He falls into the Odin sleep at the end of it. And yes, but this movie realized that there's a basic issue with Loki as such, because Loki in the Eddas is not binary. He's at the very least gender fluid, possibly completely fluid from complete male to complete female. To the point that he actually gives birth, because that's the reference in the Eddas. He gives birth. Don't think you can get more female than that in medieval ideas of male and female, which is what Asgard is. They do nothing with that in the comics, except that he has a female aspect in the comics. There's a female Loki going around. She's very dangerous. Even more dangerous than the normal Loki, because the normal Loki is pretty... He's chaotic, but no, female Loki is even more dangerous. And there's another thing that is weird for the comics and the Eddas. And Odin says that in the movie, Odin says that Loki is Loki's father, and in the Eddas, Laufey is his mother. Farbauti is his father. Farbauti is completely absent in the Marvel universe, or I think in the Marvel universe, it's in the MCU, there is no Farbauti. There's just a father. There is no mother. And when they were at the planet, at the Frostbite planet earlier, they sort of gate crash just them in their own home, basically. There is not a single person that you might call female there. They are all flat-chested, deep-voiced, and they in the snow, in the ice and the snow, they're completely open-chested as well. There's nothing covering anything. They just wear a loincloth in the freezing weather because they're frost giants. And so by making Laufey his father and there is no mother, it's interesting. I think because Odin says to Loki, I took you because I wanted to make use you to make a lasting peace. How do people in feudal times make lasting pieces between countries or worlds is by marrying off a son to a daughter, and then usually the way the Romans did it with especially Britain, and Kenneth Branagh would have known that because it's in their history books, is that the Roman emperors would ask or kidnap, same thing, the sons of the Britons to come and live in Rome, be educated in Rome under Roman ideas, and then send them home as fully Romanized Britons. Not really as Romans, but as Romanized Britons, so people you can talk to each other. You can have the same concepts. You don't have to keep repeating, we need taxes and it works like this. You simply put somebody there. And I think that's what the concept was that kind of Branagh was going for. And I think what he thought that Odin's reasoning might have been, one, he finds the baby. It is undersized. That is in the lore, and it's in the movie. The baby is undersized. Is it possible that he thought that Loki was a girl and didn't check under the hood just to be sure? Brought Loki home as a girl, but gave the baby to Frigga, and Frigga said, you brought me another son, and then he couldn't take it back. That's a thing. That's possibly what happened. And also because Frigga never had a second child usually means that she couldn't, because usually when people can have children and they should have like an heir and a spare, they usually do have the heir and the spare, and usually a spare to the spare as well. Probably means that she could only have the one. So having a second child would have made Frigga pretty happy. That it turns out that it's not a girl might have... that's one possibility. The other possibility is that Odin may have been peripherally aware that these frost giants are not binary, and might have had some sort of idea of gender fluidity, but may or may not have fully understood it or ever been any way to understand it, and he might have thought that this baby could be maybe now a boy, but could be a girl, and then marry, grow up as a princess of Jotunheim, that is living in Asgard, and then be interesting to Thor and marry, either as a straight up girl or as a gender fluid creature, because these frost giants are forces of nature. They are, if you go down to it, that's why the gender ambiguity is you can't really apply our genders to it. But he may have not had the right idea about it. But the moment he gets this gender fluid child home, and he lives in a completely binary world, to the point that Lady Sif actually had to fight for her right or for her option to be a warrior. It was not normal. It needed fighting. Thor had to support her to get there. They actually established that in the movie. So when push came to shove, the gender roles overrode everything else, and Loki had little or no female aspect, and there was no queen for Thor to marry. There was no lady. What Odin should have done, the last option he had, is just accept Loki for the male that he is, and still prep him as a prince of Jotunheim to become king. That's what he says to the little boys. Both of you will become king. I think he meant Loki to become king of Jotunheim, and why that didn't happen is unclear. And so that is actually, they should have stated a little bit more clearly. But the whole gender fluid thing, this is 2011 when this film came out. It's 10 years ago. A lot has happened in the last 10 years. I think that Kenneth Branagh felt at the time he couldn't put that forward. So he put it in fits and starts, and in where people stop talking instead of where people are actually talking. It's very craftily done, but it's very it's very few people picked up on it, but it's there. The bad writing is that in that time, since he was a little kid, since he was born and he was a little kid and grew up 1,000 years, that Loki didn't figure it out. That was the issue. He was so different from these shiny Asgardian blondes. The film is slightly misrepresenting itself because you have the Lady Sif as well, who is also an exception, and she's dark-haired because that is also an exception. So she is very much an exception, like Loki, and the film didn't have enough time to present enough normal people in Asgard, because everybody is an exception. Even Heimdall is an exception. Even Frigga is an exception, because Heimdall is actually Vanir, and so is Frigga from past time. They skip all that because they don't have any time for it at all. But that's why Heimdall is an exception. And he's dark. They picked a black person for that, which is wonderful. But he's Vanir. He's not Asgardian as such. And Sif, I believe officially she is actually Heimdall's daughter. So they messed that up a little bit because they went a different route. She's basically, in this version, she's basically an Asgardian who chose to be a warrior, which was exceptional. And then her hair is dark because stuff happened in the past, and Loki's fault. Loki was to blame for that, and he couldn't get her blonde hair back, so he got her nice hair, but it was black. So you get so much in this that you're completely taken off the point. These people are so binary and so samey that they can't accept a girl wanting to be a warrior. There's no way in hell they're gonna accept Loki as a gender fluid frost giant prince. Forget it. So I think that is the reason why Odin just gives up on it and just hopes for the best, which is dumb. It's not going to work. When you adopt people, you have to tell them where they're from and why, because that is F's Loki up so bad. In this movie, this effing up. This should have been, if he had been just the 15 years that he appears to be, this is a good movie and that works really well. And then he has an identity crisis up the wazoo, and then the way he turns bad, I don't agree with that. It doesn't really work. If you also wanted him to come around and be something to, in the future, to being good, the nature of being bad doesn't work here. But the film has no choice, because they had to set up this character to be the bad guy in the Avenger movies, which was pretty much being prepped at the same time as this one, and it's going to get filmed next, back to back, because this one came out 2011 and the Avenger movie came out 2012. Basically, this movie is subject to that setup. They had to set up Thor, and they had to set up Loki, and it had to be done fast. And then it had to, Branagh wanted to do it as fairly as he could, which he didn't have enough time. It should have been 2 movies. There was no time. It's also, of all these movies, because I looked them up now, it is the one with the smallest budget. It's not by much the smallest budget, but it is the smallest budget. And yeah, that's costing him. The movie ends with Thor and Loki fighting, and then because Loki was trying to get approval from this Odin, who turns out is not his father, but he was always thought he was his father, and he can't. Whatever he does, it's wrong. And in the end, when Loki is dangling by the staff on the edge of the Rainbow Bridge, at that salient point, Odin says, "No, you did it wrong," and then Loki says, "Okay, I'm done," and he goes off the deep end and into space. End of story. If they had done the plot line 1,000 years earlier when they were 15, and he had been falling for 1,000 years to land up in Earth. Yes, absolutely wonderful. That would have fitted, but it happened in 2011, and in 2012 the Avenger movie happens, and he arrives in back into our world through the Tesseract, through the magic transporter beam, and now we get into a whole bunch of if it was written well, he would have fallen 1,000 years to Earth, or stuff happened on the way, because stuff did happen. He arrives on Earth through the Tesseracts, which I don't know is it called. I think they know it's called the Tesseract. The Tesseracts just start to emit energy, and they realize that this thing is a portal, that they are aware of roughly what it is. It's a portal, and the other side is opening up, and out steps Loki. And he looks terrible. He is, he's got sweat all over. The lips are the same color as his skin, which is always a sign of really, okay, we're now unwell. He looks confused. His eyes are this wide. And he almost immediately attacks, because he's almost immediately attacked. People shout stuff at him and then he attacks. And turns out it's a little bit unclear the action is shot well. I have no complaints about that. It's clear in the movie what is going on from the point of view of the people around him. What's going on with him is a little bit less clear. He appears to be a bad guy, and he says I've come with glorious purpose, and freedom is your great lie, and I'm gonna use my glow stick and make you be my slave. This be my slave thing is actually something from the comics, which I didn't know that when I first watched it, but it is a thing in the comics that Loki does. He can bewitch people in that way, make them do whatever he wants. But it's actually, when you look at the scene, it's actually the glow stick that does it. In fact, anything other than, he throws a couple of knives, anything other than jumping around, anything powerful is done by the stick, by the scepter. Which has a bright blue stone in it. Anybody touched by the scepter, their eyes turn a very uncomfortable, non-human kind of blue, and they fall in line, and Loki doesn't even have to command them. They just know exactly what to do, which is interesting. What I noticed the very, very, very first time I saw it is that text that he has. I was going, wow, your text is bad. It's the glorious purpose speech, and a god of mischief talking about freedom being a lie. What? What? I mean, really? And it's going, anybody's buying this? And it's going, you know what? And I didn't know about Tom Hiddleston. Tom Hiddleston is a wonderful actor, but I didn't know that. It becomes clear later. There's something really screwy going on here. And you find out a couple of scenes later that he's set up a base with these people he picked up. He picked up Hawkeye, and he picked up Dr. Selvig, which are very useful people to pick up, because Hawkeye is a very capable person when you actually, later he looks like he's a sort of hanger-on with a bow. This guy is very capable. You set him to organize something. This guy is the one you want to organize your invasion. If you're an alien, get him and he'll do it for you. And basically that's what happens. Hawkeye just keeps going, and all Selvig has to do is do all the science stuff, and all Loki has to do is actually, what does Loki have to do? He's the contact with, there turns out to be a bigger bad. he makes contact with the bigger bad, and the one that you see is a chap called the Other. They never give him a name, but he's called the Other, and he is actually the underling of Thanos, who is going to be in the future the biggest big bad. But in this movie, he is a name that doesn't pop up until the post-credit scene. So we don't know. He's implied, but the Other is the bad behind Loki. And this conversation that he has with this bad is very interesting, because there's a lot of posturing going on, and Loki says, I want my kingdom and stuff like that. But it ends with this Other making some really bad threats at Loki. And this is not a situation where Loki is actually in charge. He's trying to keep some agency by saying, "Oh yeah, I will do your invasion if you. I mean, I can do your invasion, but you better give me an army to do it with." But that is, and then I want a throne out of it. But what they don't say is that I don't think that Loki actually believes he's going to get a throne out of these people. If he has fallen through space earlier for a very long time and ended up in Thanos' lap. This is what we think that happened. He ended up in Thanos' lap, and then he started working with Thanos. And from the future we know, and also from the Thanos that exists in the comics before they decided to go with the Thanos that they went with, is this guy is not compatible with life. This guy is a person who likes death. Loki cannot really work with this. It's he's gonna get, best case scenario, he's gonna die painlessly. Worst case scenario, he's gonna get tortured to death. Are these your options? And if you look at it from that point of view, suddenly the scene at the beginning starts to make sense, or more sense, especially if you think, which people do think, that while Selvig and the Hawkeye are fully taken over by the Scepter, Loki may not be completely under his own agency either. He may at the very least be monitored for sound and sight, so he can't just talk freely. But he may actually be under influence, and in that very first scene he may be more, and as time goes by, it starts to erode a little bit. It is very clear that he's not under enough agency. What he does is, what he should have done if he had been the bad guy that he appears to be, is arrive, get the Tesseract, because they needed the Tesseract, get Hawkeye and Selvig, wonderful, abscond, disappear. His job was to open up a portal to the sky and get in the fleet of Thanos. He should have just gone to Australia, in the bush, do it there. What does he do? No. He needs an obtainium, and instead of going to secure bunker somewhere to get the stuff, he goes to Frankfurt. He goes to the evening of a gala, and he makes sure that he is seen at the gala, and then he goes outside and he has another big scene, and then he maneuvers himself onto the good guys flying ship. Make sure he's seen by everybody. He's like playing a game of peekaboo. He ends up in New York on top of Stark's own tower, just to make sure, Stark, I'm over here. Come and stop me, because if you don't, Thanos is coming. He can't say that for many reasons. Maybe because he's being monitored. Maybe because he's half under control of Thanos. Even if either of these things were not so, he has been to Earth before. He knows people, and he knows that we only get ourselves in gear if we're angry enough. If it's just a question, he couldn't just go to the United Nations and say, "Excuse me, Thanos is coming, please do something." we'd never get out of the talking stage. This, if you want to get our asses, or the asses of the MCU in gear fast, this is the way to do it. Make a lot of brouhaha, annoy Captain America, annoy Iron Man. Thor shows up, even better. The only problem with Thor showing up is that he might actually stop the whole thing from happening by taking Loki away. And no matter the threat of the other was, no matter where you go, we will find you and we'll give you something worse than death. Him going to Asgard, sitting in a jail there, would not have done something. He wants Thanos clobbered. What I also think happened is, because I think it's mentioned somewhere in one of the other movies, is that Thanos is like 50 travel years away. It's not light years, but his fleet would need to travel 50 years before he could get close enough to attack Earth. That was before Loki. With Loki, maybe Loki actually convinced Thanos to have him do this mission, so the Earth would be alerted, because the fleet they were sending was not a complete fleet. It was the Vanguard. It was just a Vanguard. Now Earth is alerted 50 years earlier than it would have been. All this, of course, to save his own life, or not get tortured to death by Thanos, because Thanos, and we find that out later in the Infinity War, Thanos is very good at manipulation and just torturing people for fun. Physical torture, physiological torture, emotional torture, all his thing. You don't want to be with this guy. You don't want to be in league with this guy. And I think Loki knows this, and this is why he's playing this game of peekaboo all over this film. Basically, they should have maybe made it a little clearer. There's one deleted scene that they took it out because it's smack dab in the middle of the battle, and it distracts, but it's the second time he gets threatened by the other in a mind communication. And it makes it more clear that is what they were going for. That Loki is ambivalent in this universe, and he's forced to do this at this point. The Loki in the comics is much more evil. However, in the more recent comics, starting from 2000, something like that, it's, yes, evil with a max. At some point he says, okay, now I'm willing to stand for something. And usually it's things like Thor finally dying or Frigga dying. There are things he cares about. If he was straight up a bad guy, he wouldn't be interesting. He would also not be interesting to actually make a series out of. One of the other reasons he doesn't actually bother to tell Thor anything or ask S.H.I.E.L.D. anything, even if he knew about S.H.I.E.L.D. I mean, Barton, Hawkeye would have told him about S.H.I.E.L.D. because he told him about the other things. But he decided to not go with that. Is the same reason for the first scene of the next movie, which is Thor: The Dark World. Basically, this very first scene is Loki being drugged before Odin, and that's an interesting conversation that they have, because Loki is belligerent, he's facetious, he's making a mockery out the whole thing, he's trying to goad Odin into killing him, basically asking him, why don't you just pull the trigger on this? And an interesting take, the director of this thing is actually a person who also did lots of Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones is all feudal, medieval law, society lore. And Odin, and I've said it before, Odin is a totalitarian king. He's a feudal king. He doesn't have a counselor. Like I said, he hardly listens to Frigga. If he listens to anybody, he doesn't even listen to Thor at all. Loki comes there and he realizes that even if he says to Odin, well, I was being forced by Thanos, it doesn't matter. He knows that these medieval people don't think that's an excuse. So if you don't have an excuse, you might as well live it up. His options are get executed or sit in jail and wait for Thanos to come and torture you to death. So he asks Odin to kill him. And Odin doesn't do it because he's soft-hearted and because Frigga asks him. And so Loki ends up in jail where he... I think the other reason why Odin doesn't do it is that there are exactly 3 magic users in Asgard. Odin himself, Frigga and Loki. He can't really afford to get rid of Loki for that reason, because Loki is really good and nobody else is interested because it's a girl's art who no warrior is interested in. Thor isn't interested in it. He has the magic hammer and he has some magic inside, but he has no interest in actually cultivating it. None at all. It's not manly to want to do. It's actually in the Edda where I tried to find this gender ambiguity for Loki. It's there where Loki accuses Odin of being a dirty magic wielder, and and Odin accuses Loki of being a dirty childbearer. And these things are not manly. So, for this reason, I think this is what Odin lets him live, other than the fact that you really want to have Loki in your universe because he's fun. And Loki is sitting there and going, Of course, he doesn't. He has some time, but there's another bat that comes and kills off Frigga. The only person, because he knows that Odin is not his father, and Thor, he has a complicated relationship with Thor, but Frigga, for all the fact that she is not physically his mother, is his mother. And then she is murdered. And he was stuck in the dungeon. And this gets him up to take part in the adventure, which is not going to go into that. It's simply well written. It works well. I think because they've already established Loki as being a little bit. He was stupid for 1,000 years. Sort of this being funny blabbermouthy kind of thing. They set it up in this one. They don't have any time in the other ones, so this is where you get the talky mouth Loki out of and the gags and the funniness, which is in the original comics. And he is the god of mischief. He was mischief for the sake of mischief, sure. So that's nice. The story ends for Loki with a moment where he has to work together with Thor, and they actually pull a fast one over on the elves, which for the audience thinks for a moment that he's betraying Thor, but he wasn't. And then he actually battles it out and actually dies for the cause at hand, and Thor sees him die. The interesting / weird thing about that is that Thor actually leaves him on the Svartalfheim, which is the home of the Black Elves. It's another planet. He just leaves him there, which is not the done thing. He would have taken him home. This is subject to, because then, of course, Loki isn't dead, and he absconds, and he somehow takes over Odin's place. And I think that is again bad writing, because I think that is set up for other stuff which shouldn't have been in this movie, or done differently in this movie. It's getting it's clear that, oh, this was on the list that you also have to do. Okay, let's do it quickly. So it is not. It's this movie is good because Loki was in it quite a bit. I'm gonna do a review about this movie at some point because there's a lot to be said, more to do with Thor. But Loki was good in this movie.
I have a question. Peanut gallery here.
Yes, please.
So he dies in battle.
Yes.
What's his motivation? I mean, I'm gonna ask the basic question. Is he fighting to the death for his family, for Thor, for possibly his father or his mother?
They make it clear.
Or is he fighting for Asgard? Or is he actually doing it for himself? What is...
Well, I think you asked because this scene has been the actual death scene, the death scene has been repeated in the Ragnarok film and the last film that we saw, the fourth film without Loki. That same death scene gets repeated in the play. It is completely explained in the movie. They went on this adventure because Frigga was murdered and it was for revenge. And Loki says...
Thor avenge his mother.
Yeah, Thor says, "Can I trust you?" And then Loki says, "Trust that I want revenge." And he followed through on that. So that's all about Frigga. And then when he actually dies, he's ambiguous about, and then Thor says, "Oh, I will tell Father that you died beautifully." And then Loki says, "I didn't do it for him." And the film implication is he died for Frigga. Maybe a little bit for Thor, but I think he's probably too ambivalent about that at that point to actually say that. But he's definitely dying for Frigga. He did it for Frigga. For the mother of 1,000 years, who taught him all the magic that he knows, and who gave him any value that he had, comes from her. And
but she loved him like a son. She didn't have the ulterior motive that Odin did.
Yeah, even to the point that at the beginning of the movie, Odin decrees that Loki will go to dungeon for all eternity and never see Frigga again. She actually just breaks Odin's decree and just uses a 3D projection to go in there. There was actually a problem in the movie with that, actual movie making problem when I first saw it, because you have the conversation between Frigga and Loki, and then it ends with him trying to touch her, and she dissolves the 3D. The thing is, he is a master of illusions, and the story goes on to something else. There was actually a deleted scene where there's the other end of where Thor walks in on Frigga trying to make the transmission. It's not in the original cut. When I saw it, I thought that Loki had just illusioned her there, and he was talking to an illusion of her.
That's what I thought, yeah.
The deleted scene shows that it was actually her. So... yeah, she always stuck out for Loki and stuck to him and looked out for Loki and stuck to him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, now that she's dead and he disappeared and actually took over Odin's role, yeah, and that is what Ragnarok is about. Thor has been away doing stuff. Comes back some years later. Let me put back on my glasses. Ella.
Drop page.
Here, Ragnarok. He comes back home and quickly unmasks. You saw that one as well. He unmasks Loki from being Odin. And the entire movie is about these people who through history were together for many years and had many adventures. I presume, could never get to see them, but they presume they had many adventures. Had a falling out, realized that when the glue that was their brotherhood was a lie, that they had nothing in common, fell out and now have to work together again. And that's what the adventure for Loki is about, is working back together again and finding some sort of consensus. And they do, and enjoy the movie, it's good. We did. It's a good romp. And it ends up with them on Odin has died, destroyed Asgard on a refugee ship in space, and the end credits scene is where they're ruminating about would it be a good idea to go to Earth with Loki or should he make another plan, and then all plans are changed because enter Thanos, the actual Thanos, not just the other. I think the other may not have been there, but the big guy shows up. This is the beginning of the end. Infinity War, very first scene. We just cut straight from Ragnarok to Infinity War. You don't even have to go through the credits, just go straight on, because we're still on the ship. They've been Thanos has killed everybody. I'm still looking some of the stuff up, but there's simply inconsistencies in what was killed and what is taken to as... don't ask. Disappears like everybody is killed. Thanos has this thing in this universe where he kills half of everybody because it's merciful. Can I stick up a middle finger and still you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh well.
Thanos is that's the problem with Thanos, and this scene, it is absolutely worth seeing. If you're not going to watch any of the Infinity Wars, you need to watch this scene if you're going to go for Loki, because Thanos he's actually there because of an Infinity Stone that Loki put in his pocket when he maybe ought not to have done. He could not do that. Kind of mischief. But no, I think he was actually right to do that. It wouldn't have worked anyway because Asgard, it would have stayed on Asgard, it would have been destroyed, and Thanos would have gotten it anyway. Because it's indestructible. So it doesn't matter if he took it or not. But it takes them to them, and Thanos threatens to kill Thor very, very gruesomely. So Loki fesses up and tries to butter up to Thanos just with the idea of trying to shove a dagger in his face. This fails and Thanos kills him. End of Loki's story. It's a very interesting scene because there's the usual, it appears that Loki is going to be betrayed the cause, and then he doesn't. But the motivation of Loki here is he has no choice, because you cannot work with Thanos. Thanos either kills you or he kills you gruesomely. There is no in between. There's no other option. So he went for he kills you. He had no choice. And that's where the story ends. End of Loki, MCU, everything. Actually, there's more. Because there's the Loki series.
I have one more question about the films. And it's a detail. But when Loki is in jail and he reveals... In
For the Dark World, in jail, yes?
Yeah, and then he reveals how he is in jail. When he's got everything, he had basically, he's effectively mentally dying there. He can't do this. He's keeping up appearances, literally.
Yes, by illusion.
By illusion, but the moment that he lets that go...
that's just after
how badly off he is.
Yeah, just
is
after
he going nuts. Yeah. Is my question.
Yes, he is slowly going nuts because and specifically there because he just heard that Frigga was murdered, possibly by something that he helped along plot, but there was in that jail there was a jailbreak, and the bad guy didn't break him out, but he sort of, in his mischief idea, said, go that way, it's faster to go up to people you want to clobber, because he wasn't feeling very charitable to Odin and company, and they sort of figured, they can take care of themselves. Little did he know that Frigga can also take care of herself, but there was 2 against 1. And that got Frigga killed. So he feels very guilty, and he has a nervous breakdown of the grief and guilt type, to the point that when later, because Odin has said, "Oh, you're not allowed to do anything about this," Thor wants to do something anyway, and he goes and looks for Loki, because Loki is the only way to get them out of Asgard without permission from Odin, because Loki can do that sort of thing. He goes to talk to Loki, and that's the scene you're talking about, and it looks like he's in charge, he's done up, he's walking around and then Thor, who knows him for 1,000 years, says drop the act, and he drops the act, and it's bad. He trashed the place, his clothing are torn, the whole thing. So this has been a long time in coming. And if you take the story, the storyline as written, Loki falls off the Rainbow Bridge at the end of Thor. He ends up in the clutches of Thanos. He's probably tortured, because Thanos does that sort of thing. He he talks himself out of it enough that he can be on Earth and try to do something. He's still in an untenable position. The best case scenario that he thinks could possibly happen actually happens. These Earthers get off their butts and actually do something. But he ends up in Asgard anyway, which he probably figured was going to happen, in jail. And that's the first moment since that he just dropped off the Rainbow Bridge that he actually has some time for himself. And then the bad stuff just keeps coming, because he's there for a couple of months, and then bang, his mother is dead, and he couldn't do anything about it, and possibly he did something to cause it. I don't think he really did, because it would have happened anyway. That's not his fault, but he might feel guilty about it. So, yeah. And this is a roller coaster ride, and it ends up with him being dead by Thanos, which is what he was afraid of. Or that's actually the better case scenario of the things he was afraid of. Because there's no getting away from this guy. Loki was born an Asgardian, and for the first 1,000 years he believed Asgardian ways, which include Valhalla and all that kind of thing. At some point he found out he's not Asgardian but Jotun, and so he claimed Jotun for about that not long, and pretty quickly he changed back to Asgardian. He died an Asgardian. And when Asgardians die in battle, they go to Valhalla. Loki has gone to Valhalla. Frigga is already there. Heimdall is already there. I think Odin is not there, because he didn't die in battle. He just died of old age, I think. Sort of wanting to die. And that's it, right? Which brings us to the Loki series. The Loki series is interesting because the premise of the show is that the original Loki is called Loki Prime. For those people who are interested in this kind of thing, this universe is known as Earth 616. That is this universe. Loki Prime of 616 is now dead. However, in the middle of the end of the Avenger movies, of the first Avenger movie, Loki was muzzled and ready to be shipped off to Asgard. The later movie, the one you haven't seen yet, so I'm not going to tell too much about it, but stuff happened, and a time machine was involved. Let's call it that. A time machine was involved, and you know what happens when you have time machines? You have paradoxes. So what happens is a paradox, and instead of Thor just taking Loki to Asgard and him doing the whole that Frigga and all going to die from Thanos kind of thing, the Tesseracts just rolls out of a box because people were being stupid, and right in front of him of Loki, and the Tesseract is actually an artifact that does transportation really well. It's apart from the fact that it's also an Infinity Stone. It's a space stone, but you can transport yourself with it, which is why. So he grabs it and he transports himself, and he absconds. He absconds from the timeline. Oh my god! And that's what the series is about. So this is the one that fell off the Rainbow Bridge, ended up at Thanos, got tortured by Thanos, got to do the entire thing in New York, and is basically still reeling from the fact that he was tortured by Thanos. And that's the one that walks into the series. We end up with Loki, the series, Loki, the series. There you go. The first episode of the series takes this Loki, and this is where my bad writing thing comes here. We've been doing fine, but this is where the bad writing comes, because they go by the Loki that as he appears in the Avenger movie, not the one that had the extra plan. So they go with the dumber, the Loki is just a bad guy kind of plot, and they go from there, which I think is a shame. It's just bad writing. They didn't pick up on the fact that Loki was doing his peekaboo thing. And so they have to do, in this first episode, they have a problem, because now you have a guy who is basically a bad guy, and you have to make him the star of your show. I mean, we're very motivated because we have Tom Hiddleston, who's A, motivated, B, everybody's motivated for him because he is Tom Hiddleston. So they want to do this really well, but they realize that making him a bad guy, as appeared in the most important, most famous thing he was in, because everybody's seen the Avengers movie. Not everybody's seen the rest, but if everybody's seen the Avengers movies, they have to rehabilitate this character. And that's where the first episode comes in with the Christmas Carol plot, because basically that's what it is. They show him the person who is in the middle of the story. They show him what the story end is going to be if he kept on the story. And when I saw it, I thought, oh my god, how is he going? Are they going to have to put him back afterwards? And it turns out that's different. That's not the case, and we'll talk about that in the thing that we talk about the series. But this characterization, this is about this characterization, and I think they made a mistake by not acknowledging this smart Loki. Because now we have this the Loki that talks fast from For the Dark World, and it's a little bit funny, and I like this Loki. I have no problem with this Loki, but they should have acknowledged the other one. They are starting to acknowledge this the gender fluidness of Loki. The character, and that is not the first episode, but it's after a character shows up who is a female Loki. She's the female. This is a spoiler, sorry. Not for the people here because we've seen it, but for the show. This female Loki was a split off from little Loki, all of 8 years old maybe, 8 years old. Who apparently there's some issues with some of the sci-fi in this, and we'll talk about it in the other thing. It's not here important here. Apparently, her Frigga and Odin told her who she was, and I think they go over a little bit faster than they ought to have. I think this Loki, whose name is Sylvie, who renamed herself Sylvie. Was experimenting at that time to be female version, so she was just just doing kid stuff while in a female form, and for some reason that violated the timeline, and she was taken out. So they must have also gone back and undone this. They told her that she was a gender fluid race. So that's what I think they did cater to that part. They should have said it a little bit clearer. But yeah, I think that's the take on the kind of Brenna idea of Queen Loki, either female Loki or gender fluid Loki, who becomes a possible queen for Thor. But it doesn't pan out. In this universe, it was about to start to pan out, and it was cancelled. And that's why they have the female version of her. So we come to the beginning, all the way from the end. I would have liked to see the smart Loki that did the runaround on the Avengers in the Avenger film be the... Maybe they're going to work up to that. This Loki... we'll talk about that in the next thing, because basically that's part of the Loki series, and I'm gonna... Yeah. Loki Prime is dead. And here endeth his story. He died heroic, and I assume he is in Asgard. In Valhalla. Because died in battle. So, yeah.
But he's not an Asgardian. He is a frost giant. Do they go to Valhalla?
You know that. You know the answer to that because you saw the Thor movie. The end.
Oh, they can have a special invitation, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's in Loki Prime is in Valhalla, and our Loki, the new Loki, is a different Loki. Or maybe he's a variant on not on 616, but a variant on 617, and then he's not the smart Loki from. Then he wasn't smart in I don't know. He's a variant from 616. Here endeth my ideas about Loki. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.